Hello and welcome to this tutorial. So today what I'm going to be showing you is how you can create a visitor counter like this one that counts page views and visits independently of one another. So if I refresh the page here, you see that page views are increasing by 1 each time, but visits remain stable on 24. But if I was to open this page in a new tab, it would count as a new visit. And now visits has increased by 1 to 25, and page views has also increased by 1 as well. Now you could achieve this result by relying on a third-party API, but then all of your user visitor data would be on a third-party server. If it breaks down or it closes, then you lose your user data. So in this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how you can create a counter backend yourself using Node and Express. So it's fairly straightforward if you already understand some JavaScript. If you have no prior experience using Node, this will be a good introductory tutorial. And I also want to mention that you could adapt what I'm about to show you to count anything on your app or website. For example, to keep track of and perhaps display the number of times that users have clicked on social share buttons. So let's get started with the coding. We'll start with the front end. Now this is the markup for the page we were just viewing. So the important part here and the bit we're going to be manipulating with JavaScript are the two span elements, page views count and visits count. So we're going to be inserting the number of page views and visits respectively into these elements, and we're going to be retrieving those values from the backend that we are going to create after we've finished on the front end. So in my script, I've already selected both of those span elements by their ID. What I want to do next is distinguish between a visit and a page view. So I'm going to be doing this here on the front end. And the trick for doing that is to rely upon session storage. So you can store something in a user's browser in the storage space that exists there using session storage by calling the setItem method on it. Now I'm going to give this a key of visit, and you want to specify a value as well. So the value doesn't actually matter. The thing that matters is that there is an item with the key of visit. Now the reason I'm doing this is because if a user navigates to another page on the same domain, then I'm going to be able to check session storage for this visit item. Now session storage, it clears all items when the user ends their current session. So if the visit key exists, then I know it's just a page view within the same session. If it's not there, then I know it's a new session, or in the language we're using on the front end, a new visit. Now what I'm going to do is to push this code down, because I don't want to do this until I've already checked if that item already exists in session storage. So to check whether the visit item already exists, I call getItem on session storage, passing in the key I'm checking for, and I want to check if that is equal to the value of null. Now if the value is null, then it means the visit item doesn't exist, and this is a new user visit, and of course it's a page view as well. If there is a visit item there, so if it doesn't equal null, then it's just a page view. So this is how we can distinguish between a visit and a page view, and just a page view in front-end JavaScript. Next, what we want to do is to make a call to the server we are going to create, and we want to let the server know whether it's a new visit and a page view or just a page view. So I'll create a new function here, and I'll call it update counter. And inside here, what I'm going to do is to make a fetch request. So I'm going to be making a request to an API that is up and running on my system locally. So I want to make a request to 127.0.0.1. So this is effectively localhost. And when we set up the server, we have to specify what port it's listening on. So usually servers are up and running on around port 3000 because most of those ports are free. You can specify it manually. When you create the server, I'm going to say in advance that the server is going to be up and running on port 3002. Now, when I make the request, I want to send a signal to the server, letting it know if it's a new visit and a page view, or just a page view. So for that, I'm going to add a query string to the end of the URL. So you start those with a question mark, and the next value is going to be the data. So this is going to be dynamic. So I'm going to add a parameter to this function. Now what I'm going to do inside each of these blocks is to call the update counter function and pass in an argument specifying whether it's a new visit and a page view or just a page view. So I'm going to do that by creating a URL parameter. So the format is key equals and then the data. So this is going to be visit page view, and the argument, when it's just a page view, I'm going to delete the visit, so it's just page view. So what's happening with the request now is that it's dynamic. The URL parameter that will appear at the end of the request will reflect the type of visit to the page. Now the server we are making the request to doesn't exist yet, but we can already handle the result because it's going to be a very simple result that is being sent back. So the first thing is going to be in JSON format. So once you have the result, you want to convert that from JSON to a JavaScript object by using the JSON method, and then you have available to you the data in the next then method. Now I already selected the elements where we want to write those values to, page views count and visits count. So I'm going to update those values here. So page views count dot text content is going to equal the value of data dot page views, and then we do the same for the visits count. So what we're doing is taking the page views and visits value from the data object and setting those to the values of the HTML elements that are displayed to the user. So those values, they're coming back from the request we're making to the server running on port 3002. So that is it for the front end. So what we're going to do next is to create the server that is doing the counting. Okay, so for the back end, we're going to be using Node.js. So if you haven't installed it already, go to nodejs.org and you can download it for free. I would recommend downloading this left-hand side version because it's the more stable version. If you're not sure if you've already installed Node, then in your terminal, I'm using PowerShell here, you can type node flag v. If you get a version number back, you know you've got Node installed. If not, you know that you still need to install it. So assuming you've already installed Node, what you're going to want to do is to create a folder where you're going to create the server on your system. So mine's just on the desktop here, and you want to go to that folder in your terminal. So if you just drag and drop the folder, you get the full path. And then inside here, you want to create a new Node project. Now I'm going to accept all the defaults here, so you can use double flag Y here, following npm init. So that's going to very quickly create a new Node project in the folder. So we're going to be relying upon a couple of packages here. So I'm going to install those in the Node server. The first is Express. We're going to be using that to create the server, and also a package for Express called cause. So you need to make sure that you install those before we start the code. So now with these steps complete, we are ready to create the server using JavaScript. Okay, so inside the Node server folder, the first thing I'm going to do is to create a new JavaScript file. I'll call it @js. You can call it anything you like. And the first thing I want to do at the top of the script is to import the Express package that I just installed. And the next thing I want to do is initialize Express. So I'm going to store the result of that under a reference app. So that is going to be our server, and you initialize Express by just calling it like that. Now I also want to import the cause package that I installed, and I also want to install a native module. So this is the file system module. You don't need to download it. If you have Node installed, then you've already installed the file system module. This gives you access to the file system so you can read and write a file. So we're going to be using that to create the JSON file where we're updating the counts. So to create the endpoint where we were making the GET request on the front end, I call get on app, and then I specify the path. So it's at /API. After that, I write a function that contains two parameters, request and response. So when a request comes through to the server, this function runs, and you have rec available to you, which will give you some information about the request itself, where it's coming from, and res, which has methods on it, which allow you to respond to the request. So this is going to be the endpoint that requests are being made to. I also need to specify the port that the server is going to be running on. So I said it's going to be on port 3002, and as an optional second argument, we'll just say in a console log, server running on port 3002. Okay, so every time a request comes in, this function runs. At the moment, we're not doing anything inside it. So let's program the response now. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is to check if the request is for a favicon. So there's an odd behavior where browsers, if they can't get the favicon the first time, make another request to the server. This would end up counting twice unless we check for it. So if it's rec.url /favicon.ico, then we just want to end the request in that case. So if it's just a follow-up request from the browser for a missing favicon, then we want to immediately end the request. We don't want that to end up counting towards the visits and page views. Okay, so now for the counting. So I'm going to be reading and writing to a JSON file that I'm going to be creating in just a moment in the Node server folder. So the first thing I want to do is to read the contents of that file. So I'm going to call it count.json, and the encoding is standard UTF-8, so that's the standard encoding for text. So I'm going to save the JSON file that I'm reading there under the reference of JSON. Okay, so what I want to do with that JSON data is to convert it to a JavaScript object so I can edit and update it. So to do that, I can use the pass method on JSON, passing in the JSON data. So I'll save a reference to that. So now I have a JavaScript object. What I'm going to do is update the properties. So the first one I want to update is page views. So every single request that comes in is a page view. So that means I don't have to have an if conditional here. Every time a request is made, I'm going to update the value of the property page views to its current value +1. Now for the visits property, the increase in value by 1 is going to be conditional upon the URL parameter value that has been sent with the request. So in order to check what that is, you can say rec.query and then the name of the key you have given to the URL parameter. So in this case, it was type, and the value, if it's a new visit, is going to be visit-pageview. So if this is the case, then object.visits, the new value of that is going to be the current value of object.visits +1. Okay, so in the response to the request, the values inside this JavaScript object have been updated. What I want to do next is to save these changes to file. But first, I'm going to convert the JavaScript object back to JSON. So I'll call this new JSON. And to convert the object back to JSON, I pass it in to the stringify method. Now to write that new JSON file to file, I can use the write file sync method on the file system module, and I'll say that that's going to be written to a file called count.json. If it already exists, then it's simply going to overwrite the file. And the second argument is the file contents. So this is going to be new JSON. Now finally, I want to make new JSON the response of this request, so we can receive it in the front end. So I can pass that in as new JSON. So that is the updated file in JSON format. Now inside Node server, I'll create the JSON file here. So I've already specified that it's going to be called count.json. So this is going to be really simple. There's two properties on it, page views. So this can start at 0 or another number if you like. So I'll give it a starting value greater than 0, and visits is the other property. So I'll set that to a number that's lower than the page views. Now the final thing I'm going to do here is to prevent a cause error occurring. So this is why I imported this cause middleware for Express. So to set up cause to work with this server that we have created, I call app.use, and then I initialize cause inside the parentheses there. So this is going to prevent any cause error occurring while I'm testing my app. In production, you probably want to set a list of safe IP addresses, but for testing purposes, it's good not to run into this problem. And of course, it's only me making the request. Okay, so hopefully now when we start the server and access the HTML document on the front end, it's going to be displaying the values contained in this count.json file, and they are going to update as we refresh the page or open a new tab in the case of visits. So to start the server, you type node followed by the name of the JavaScript file, which in this case was app.js, and then you should get a message like this: server running on port 3002. So the server is up and running now. Let's open index.html, and when I go live, hopefully we should see those values that are saved in the count.json file. So if I refresh now, you see that page views are increasing every time I do that. If I open a new tab, so the visits here 57, 131. Now it's 58, 132. So we are successfully getting the page views and visits and also updating them via making a request to the server we just created. So I'm displaying the raw counts here for page views and visits, but if you want to, you can make it much more complex on the back end. You can distinguish page views and visits by day, for example. You could also count something other than page views and visits, such as the number of social shares of a post, for example. So if you're looking for some follow-up exercises, these are two things that you could try. It would be especially useful to try and recreate it for social shares, because then you'd have to go through the whole process again, and you'd make sure that you understood and can implement everything correctly. So that is it for this tutorial. I hope you found it useful. If you did, please consider hitting the like button down below this video. It helps with the algorithm and others to find this video. And if you'd like to see more content like this from us in the future, don't forget you can subscribe to the channel.